Hello and welcome back to another Doctor Who Big Finish audio drama review. In today's review I'm taking a look at the fourth volume of Classic Doctor's New Monsters, which as the title suggests sees multiple classic incarnations of the Doctor going up against new series creations, including the Clockwork Droids from Girl in the Fireplace, Harmony Shoal from the 12th Doctor era, and of course the Silence. But nobody can really remember them. So this release is available to order now on the Big Finish website on both physical CD and digital download. Apologies for the length of this review, but I think they're four very varied stories, so I had quite a lot to ramble about. So the opening episode of the set is Invasion of the Body Stealers, as written by Jonathan Morris. The interesting thing with a series like Classic Doctor's New Monsters is that as it continues, the harder it becomes. Volume 1 displayed the most obvious choices, Volume 4 must dig a little bit deeper into new series canon, but I actually think that makes the series more exciting. In my personal opinion, I do think that Volume 3 did struggle a little bit, simply because it didn't have a big draw. I mean, there was the Moxa Balhoun's brother, I think, no, I'm not making that one up, there was the Dream Crabs and the Tavolians, and I think that overall, it didn't have enough draw, but this volume has a Silence, and I think that in itself will probably motivate people to want to buy this set. So this episode sees the return of Harmony Shoal from the 12th Doctor Christmas specials, the return of Dr. Mysterio, and the husbands of River Song. And not gonna lie, I completely forgot that they actually appeared twice within that era, so that was the prior knowledge that I had going into this story. I do, however, recall them as a very visual concept. I think that this story perfectly embraces the body horror, and it's actually very creepy. The destruction and removal of the human brain I found really sinister, taking away that identity and replacing it with something completely new, seeing the human as no more than a vessel, which I think truly makes them a monster within this story. If anything, I actually found it more scary than brain manipulation and takeover, as this still raises that hope, certainly for the Doctor, that takeover can be undone. But the body manipulation carried out by Harmony Shoal through a transplant is very final, it's very unforgiving. The plot itself is incredibly self-explanatory, especially given the title, but I enjoyed going into this rather fast-paced journey. A ship driven by an alien cricket crashes on a mining planet, which apparently is very visually nice, so you can imagine that in your brain, since this is audio. But the pilot of this ship is embodied by the Harmony Shoal, and then they decide to launch a planetary takeover. The Doctor, Sarah and Eben take the cricket to the local hospital facility, and this reminded me of those rather scary body transformation scenes within 70s Doctor Who, like seen within the Seeds of Doom and Ark in Space with the infamous bubble wrap. I think that this really grabbed my imagination. The personalities of the Shoal themselves are also very evil, but not in the way that you would expect. They have little quirks, sarcasm in particular. The phrases like, "I will change your mind," is brilliant. It has an excellent double meaning, which makes them actually very threatening, without really utilising the standard villain tropes. I think that they brilliantly capture the baddie vibe of 70s Doctor Who, but also the pace and presentation of New Who. This makes the piece a rather unusual middle ground concoction of both eras, and in turn a perfect experience for a Big Finish newcomer. Hearing Tom Baker and Sadie Miller together as the 4th Doctor and Sarah Jane on a solo adventure, which I do believe is a first, is also quite exciting. I know that they record the 4th Doctor adventures basically a billion years in advance, so I'm really hoping that at some point we do get some 4th Doctor and Sarah stories that can build upon season 13, because given that it is such a well-known and iconic era, I hate to use that phrase, but it is because it is the 4th Doctor and Sarah, it feels so odd that Big Finish haven't really explored that territory. And given their relationship as well, I think that this story works very well to carry the listener because the 4th Doctor and Sarah are simply so close. Tom, as always, is his usual funny self. There's certainly lots of range between seriousness and fun, and Sadie's performance is certainly a new take on Sarah. It takes a much different method compared to other recastings, the likes of Carly's War Doctor and Noonan's First Doctor. There are some lines which certainly capture the spirit and bounciness of Elizabeth's performance, but also that determination for answers. She's very positive, and of course she's a journalist, and I like the way that's incorporated into the story. But very much like how I mentioned within those recasted series, the same thing applies here. If you are not a fan of recasting, then this is not an episode for you. And I think that certainly Sadie Miller's performance carries enough of Sarah's personality for me to still be immersed within the adventure. It doesn't take me out of the story. I just think at times that Sadie Sadie brings something of herself to the role, and that's fine, because we're not going to get a carbon copy of Elizabeth Sladen. This was the type of episode that you could click play on and easily enjoy. For the most part, it's well paced, and I got what I wanted out of this adventure, although I do think the final act is a tad too rushed. I would have liked to see a bit more of a standoff between the Doctor and the Force, simply because I enjoyed their interaction and the way the story builds up, the way the threat builds up throughout the previous scenes within the narrative. I just think the end sort of comes about a little bit too quickly, so just a few more minutes to kind of embrace the ending and to embrace the conclusion I think would have been quite nice. It's certainly not an overly ambitious story, and if anything, it kind of replicates the straightforward nature of invasion stories from 70s Who, but it's certainly very enjoyable. But without a doubt, for me, in my personal opinion, I think the strongest thing to come out of this story, other than it being quite enjoyable, is Harmony Shaw themselves. I think that this story showcases the potential that this foe has, and I can envisage a full 6-part epic surrounding these creations and really digging deep on the darkness and body horror that has potential. Because the beautiful thing with Harmony Shaw, I think, and something that I didn't quite appreciate when they appeared on screen, is just how impractical they are. You know, we get so used to people taking over in Doctor Who and manipulating everything so polished and easy, and it doesn't look like people have been taken over. Here we have a species that implants their brain within other people's, takes the other brain away, leaving a massive scar on the person's face, and it's a pretty big thing about how they take over planets, and yet somehow they have not refined the correct technology or anything to cover up the giant scar, which is a bit of a giveaway. Why? Because they don't care. They don't need to. It looks cool, it looks evil, and I like that. I like the fact that it's a rather clunky thing. Again, it keeps with that rather clunkiness of classic Who, and I do want to see more of them in the future. So The Girl in the Fireplace was my first ever Doctor Who story way back in 2006, so I have quite the connection with the Clockwork Droids and was rather intrigued to hear of their return. The Queen of Clocks, as written by Jacqueline Rayner, uses some of the concepts from their debut TV story, but takes us this time to an alien world rather than a spaceship. So the Clockwork Droids are attempting to invade a castle which is led by the Queen, whilst a ship has been sent out into the stars to find a new, safer world, which preferably isn't being invaded by Clockwork Droids. But their return is imminent, and they're going to take the rest of the population away from the invaded castle, or about to be invaded castle. Spoilers. Given the prominence of time within this story, the castle is absolutely obsessed with time. The Queen has her clock maidens to make sure that time is kept on track, ensuring that everything can run safely and to protect the castle. Due to the droids once having the knowledge and skills to lead the technical aspects of this human mission, it means that the story's overall style and the environment is a very odd concoction of futuristic human space travel, because these humans do have the capability, after all, to travel out into the depths of space. However, because of their reliance on the Clockwork Droids and the knowledge that they possess, the humans themselves do not have the capability within their mind to understand why they are carrying out the task that they are doing, so they've kind of just resorted to obsessing over time. So it's very intriguing because we're in the far, far future, but there is that almost devolution of the human mind to something very medieval with castles and queens. It's lots of fun hearing the Sixth Doctor and Mel back together again. I have in fact been away from the Sixth Doctor adventures for quite a long period of time. I've not listened to any of the recent stuff of Hebe, so it is really nice to be back. Six is as egotistical as ever, but he is great. He's got the confidence and intelligence, which when accompanied by the narrative skills of Jacqueline Rayner, Colin has a lot to use to boost his performance. There's short and snappy thought processes, arrogance, and lots of heartfelt emotion. It's definitely a story where both the main protagonists go on quite the journey. It is, however, worth noting that this whole box set has been in the running for quite a long time. Within the behind the scenes, they mention remote recording and the difference from being in the studio, so that gives a rough idea of how long this box set has been in the pipeline for. And usually I don't refer to the behind the scenes and the sound quality, but it's something of which I noted with this box set, but also the 11 box set, which also contained Colin as the Sixth Doctor. There is something about the audio for Colin's dialogue in particular that isn't to the same higher quality than other characters characters within the episode. In fact, Bonnie Langford mentions that she's in studio for recording this story. I think there is a notable dip in quality between, which is a shame, but I do think Colin's performance definitely shines through. It just at times it sounds a little bit odd. I really like how Mel is written in this one. For those coming straight from the TV stories, I think this episode matches that energy very well. Very limited stories, in fact, that we got between the Sixth Doctor and Mel on screen. The relationship is great. Mel is very funny. In relation to the Queen's absolute love of time, Mel says something like, "I hope the new planet has lots of clocks on, otherwise she's going to have a nervous breakdown," which the delivery was just very funny. I also love her continued mission to get the Sixth Doctor on his exercise bike. Given the very unique nature of the Clockwork Droids, only the bare components are used from their TV serial. They still want to harvest human parts for their spaceship to repair it, and therefore I think that the narrative itself feels very fresh compared to the TV story. It doesn't simply rehash what we've already seen. As a listener, I was really taken by the world building within this one. I love how the clocks were physically integrated into the castle, and even the concept of the clock maidens is really cool. I just really liked it. I clicked with it like a ticking clock. This is absolutely not a critique of the cover art. It is a really lovely design, although the cover art itself does of course depict the clockwork robots in their French garments from The Girl in the Fireplace, which doesn't particularly make sense narrative-wise, because this is a medieval setting style story, so it makes very little sense here. But from a sales perspective, I completely get why this is done, because if you were going to be authentic, I imagine the Clockwork Droids visually within this story would look completely different to the ones seen on screen, and by using an on-screen image, it will probably attract people to want to buy this box set because of that connection to New Who, and that is the whole point of this series after all. Plus the fact that the Clockwork Droids in their original TV story are so visually stunning. But with that in mind, given that this is audio, I do think the Clockwork Droid voices don't really match what I was hoping for. They certainly don't sound completely like the TV voices. Same with the ticking that was constantly throughout the TV episode. It's not the same here. Within the TV story, they have this very monotone, very precise, very short and snappy, almost RP kind of delivery. But to me, the droids in this story lost quite a lot of that. But then again, maybe that's me being overly critical, simply because that TV story is such a high standard to maintain. In my opinion, Girl in the Fireplace, from a sound design and music perspective, is an absolute work of art, and is probably one of the best soundscapes in the entirety of Doctor Who history, so it will be very difficult to replicate that. Again, I think The Queen of Clocks is a very easy, accessible listen. It's a fun ride, and it's a good use of a new series character whilst integrating a brilliant Doctor companion duo. The narrative is really easy to get along with. It's got action, it's got emotion. I love Mel's interactions with the Clock Maidens in particular. I think it really breathes life into the story. It would have been nice to see a bit more of the Queen, I suppose. But before we move on to the next episode, I would like to praise definitely Colin Baker and Bonnie Langford, because what they do with the scenes in this story, particularly as they interact with the final problem, not revealing too much, but I think it is a really emotional delivery, and the way that the Sixth Doctor and Mel comfort each other in very different ways, I think shows the strength in their relationship, but also the layers to that relationship as well, something of which, again, we didn't particularly get to see too much of on screen, and I think that shows a great understanding in the characters, both from a writing and acting perspective. David K. Barnes has the job of finishing off this set with a silence-themed two-parter, starting off with the Silent Priest featuring the Eighth Doctor. So taking a break from the Time War, the Doctor needs time to unwind and reflect, so he opts for a church-style confession environment, where the confessions work a tad too effectively, with everyone leaving the church feeling incredibly calm, forgetting all of their problems. And as you may have guessed, a silence is the priest, but you didn't see that one coming. So two rival gangs are at war. The city, once a popular tourist destination and a rich hotspot, has fell into the realm of organised crime, with Albion Graves and Kate at the helm of each gang, but they want the mysterious valuable thing that they believe is hidden within a local church. And they also believe the Doctor knows exactly how to help. I absolutely fell for this story, the style, the concept, the characters, and despite it taking place during the events of the Time War, this is merely something the Eighth Doctor is escaping from. It doesn't actually contribute to the plot of this story, but it does feel, to me at least, very of the style of the 1996 TV movie. The way the two gangs are at the heart of the story, and everything actually feels a tad grim and threatening. This really ups the stakes of the piece. It feels like a daring Doctor Who story that has leapt straight out of the 90s. Actually, it also reminded me of the early days of the Big Finish monthly range with episodes the likes of Project Twilight and Project Lazarus from the Forge series. Although, of course, given the contents of those stories back in the day, this episode is much more toned down. But to be honest, I could easily imagine this story having the violence and murder seen within the likes of the 6th Doctor era. Yes, Vengeance on Varos, I'm looking at you. The episode overall, as well as part 2, does a very good job of handling the threatening themes with the restrictions of a Doctor Who story. The Doctor getting kidnapped, the threats made to the less successful gang members are incredibly believable, and that means that the listener can kind of read in between the lines as to what the gang bosses do to people who are less good at their jobs. What I'm trying to say is the violence of this story isn't particularly laughable or PG in style. You know, that really cringeworthy kind of GCSE style, I'm a gang member and I'm evil kind of performance that you get within more PG rated TV. Yeah, that's definitely not present here. The writers at Big Finish are so good at doing darker, brutal stories. I think that the Torchwood line is a perfect example of that, and I would love, even though it would never happen anymore, I would love to see Big Finish return to that truly darker, risky material that we got to see within their early days, the early monthly range stories, the unbound stuff. A full Fathom 5 with the 7th Doctor would be amazing. Although sadly, of course, that would never happen. And I think the frustrating thing is, if Doctor Who did continue into the 90s after the movie, I do think it would have actually started going down that route, and probably looking back, it would be a weird area within the show's history where things were allowed that we definitely wouldn't get today, particularly from the violence and blood and gore. The process of the Doctor being involved, but him not quite knowing how, is utilised in both of the silent stories within this set, but weirdly the process of the main characters forgetting, I think, adds to the many layers of the plot, rather it becoming frustrating, or simply too repetitive, where the listener is more knowledgeable than the Doctor, which is in fact a rather rare situation. You can kind of see how the various cast members interact with the certain situations that they face, and crucially those memories being removed from the situation, which I found really intriguing. A bit like a book, I believe the audio format is a lot more immersive mentally and emotionally, because the dialogue is so tailored to the characters and what they're experiencing, because a story can't be told through visuals. So I think that we kind of get further into the minds of characters than we actually would if it was a TV story, and due to the silence being present, this is a true challenge to that, which really hooked me in. I have also got the impression with some of the previous Classic Doctor's New Monsters volumes that the episodes are not necessarily run-of-the-mill. There's been some really intriguing stories out there. However, I think that sometimes they do play it quite safe. What I like about this two-parter is it doesn't play things safe. This is Big Finish doing something new with these TV creations, and I think actually showing off a bit and going, these are the exciting and different stories that we tell, which Doctor Who probably wouldn't put on TV screens. But interestingly, I do also think that this story is a unique episode, and it will not be for everybody. In fact, I think it very much tests the mood that you are in, and I can imagine me sitting down and listening to this story on a particular day and simply not clicking with it, because it is quite dialogue heavy, and it is sort of very reliant on its concept being forgetting things. I think as a result you do need to be very much immersed within the Sunset City environment and the gangs and their feud. So I think that this is a story that does warrant your full attention. So if you're not feeling that, I definitely maybe recommend switching this episode off and then coming back to it another day. I did go into this story a little bit worried actually, because it's the silence and the 8th Doctor, and there is an ongoing gag with Big Finish listeners that, the 8th Doctor basically gets his mind wiped every single week about 1 billion times. So why do we need more stories where the 8th Doctor is getting his mind wiped? But it works really well in this story because the 8th Doctor is almost a puppet, and he doesn't particularly know why. He's pushing for a cause, he's asking questions to certain people, he's pushing a narrative or a situation or a conclusion, trying to reach agreements, trying to bring characters together, but doesn't quite realise why he's doing it. He's kind of a pawn within his own game. And likewise, I think the Silent Priest is a great character as well. I don't really want to mention much about him, but I think the way that he is written is really intriguing, and I'm glad that we get to see more of him within the 4th story of the set. So overall for this episode, I think it's a really rewarding listen. It won't be for everybody, but it really impressed me. So the escapades within Sunset City continue within the final episode of the set, The Silent City. We have an older 7th Doctor in this one investigating the unusual goings-on. The city's crime past oddly vanished overnight, and now the place is booming once again. The holidaymakers are back, the rich are doing whatever the rich do, including Jessica and her father, who is the manager of a rather successful corporation. So let's take a look at the plot in a bit more detail. I'm aware that this review has in fact been a little bit longer than usual, but I feel like there is quite a lot to discuss with this box set. This story superbly builds upon the world within the previous episode, but as the 7th Doctor is at the helm, there is a darker element of suspense, which makes the whole piece feel really exciting. 7 is a manipulator, a game player. The Silents are just the same, especially within this story. The Silent Priest has a new role in the heart of the city, and it's really intriguing hearing the impression that this character has made on the society as a whole. I suppose it does twist the term monster a little bit, and therefore makes this instalment feel fresh when paired with the other episodes within the set, being the Clockwork Robots and Harmony Shoal, which were kind of more invasion stereotypical monster stories. Also superbly building on that sense of cohesion, there is also the return of Kay, the casino runner, as well as Shackett from the previous episode as well, both rival gang members. But David K. Barnes has really effectively adapted their relationship, giving the authentic impression that a time period has passed since the previous outing. I definitely recommend actually listening to the two Silent stories in quite quick succession, maybe in one sitting, certainly maybe within the same day, if doable, simply because I think the plots tie so intrinsically together. I think that you need all of the plot threads in your head at the same time in order to fully appreciate the narrative. I definitely wouldn't recommend listening to one of these stories, then going away for a few days and coming back to it. I think the way that the dialogue is presented gives Sylvester a lot to work with. His interactions with the support characters in particular elevate the story, but also have a satisfying purpose within them. It's one of those stories where everything feels so precisely placed, all of the scenes, all of the characters, they tie together with a neat bow on top, which I find really satisfying. Again, because of the accessible nature of this release, once more this box set acts as a superb whistle-stop tour of the multiple classic incarnations of the Doctor and their strengths within the audio format. Each story highlights the incarnation's individual characteristics, and I think that all 4 stories portray 3 very different incarnations of the Doctor. It's releases like this where you realise just how different each and every Doctor is, and how their actions within a story completely sway the narrative. And again, due to the way that the Silents are presented within this episode, and the Doctor kind of being a key pawn within that process, you kind of question the Doctor's actions as well, because he doesn't fully possess all of the facts, but the listener somewhat does. I think it's also important for me to say that despite these stories being connected by the Silents, and despite them sharing the same location, this is not a multi-Doctor story. We don't really have any interaction between 7 and 8, which I know that some people buy episodes solely for their multi-Doctor interaction, so do not buy this set if that is you. This is instead a narrative which ties together 2 separate incarnations, and the events of those Doctors sway each other. It's an interesting way to tell a story, and again it utilises a format of which that Big Finish can do, and the TV show kind of can't. Rather ironically, I do forget what the whole point of the Silents actually was on our TV screens, but for this story that didn't particularly matter. David K. Barnes has got the basic concept of the Silents and what we know, the very minimal stuff that we know, and then rather than just run with that, he's developed the race into a clear living and breathing society with motives and beliefs, which extends beyond merely being the baddie. There is that blurred line between bad and good. Again, this perfectly reflects the character of the 7th Doctor, but I also think it makes the Silents feel very real, and it's shown me the potential of the Silents as a creation for further stories in the future. Something of which that I did forget about the Silents is that they are essentially an outer space religious order. They belong to a church, they have these certain beliefs and teachings that they conduct their lives by, and I love the way, especially in the final act, this sways the events of the story, both for the Silents and the 7th Doctor, and I'm not going to really mention anything else, so yes, definitely check this story out if you're intrigued for more Silents content. The story continues to feel more adventurous than other entries within this range to date. Even the casino setting where Kay leads and Jessica plays her way her money is a rather unusual location, I think, telling for a Doctor Who story. But it brings together these varied characters with many problems, highlighting the flaws within the very troubled Sunset City. The angle the writing takes depicts Seven as this mysterious figure, almost one that knows deep down that his final days are coming. He is wise, but also troubled, which I as a listener found myself not entirely trusting. But when the Doctor himself also has his memories being tampered with, rather oddly, the listener is the one who will be remembering this story for some time to come, for breaking the mould, embracing the new and classic eras, but also feeling quite daring at the same time. So there we go, that is my review of Classic Doctors New Monsters Volume 4. Congratulations if you got to this point in the review. I know longer reviews don't really tend to be the thing these days, but I think that especially with box sets like this one, you've got 4 individual stories of 4 different Doctors, 4 different monsters, and there's just so much to talk about, so many characters and so many locations, so it's a lot to dissect and discuss without revealing too much about the plots. But overall for this set, I think it has a lot of the strengths of the previous box sets, because you've got a whistle-stop tour of the classic series, so it's perfect for people who are new to the audio format, but also I think they are great stories for simply wanting to listen to a bit of Doctor Who for a bit that's not entirely taxing, there's no plot arcs, it's not very heavy, and I think especially for the Silence two-parter, what I like with this box set in particular is it's not a box set entirely dedicated to easy storytelling. In fact, the Silent two-parter, I would dare say, is far more exceeded my expectations for this set, because it did something different, it did something new, and it also felt quite bold as well, which I don't really expect from sets like this. I expect more average gateway stories, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but this one surprised me in new and different ways, and I think that it also appealed more to a slightly older audience as well, whilst also doing very interesting things with all incarnations of the Doctor, but also advertising their strengths as characters. So thanks for watching, I'm going to go get a cup of tea, because it's been a very long review, and I shall see you all next time.